Today's video does contain subject matter that some viewers may be sensitive to, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. Back when I was 18, right before I graduated high school, I got what I thought was a dream job at the time. It was a local computer store that sold anything that you could possibly need, from pre-built desktops and laptops to the materials you needed to build your own. I loved it. It was like being in a toy store as a child. The problems started arising when we had a new shift manager start. We'll call her B. Now, as mentioned, I was 18 when I started there and was 19 by the time B started there. I'm also a guy, smaller build, like I probably barely looked 19. If it wasn't for my height, people would probably think that I was still a kid. So, it was kind of weird when B would say how I reminded her of her own kid, and that she was old enough to be my mom, but would also make comments about me being adorable or cute. She would talk down to me, like it was obvious that I was less than her, and then would poke fun at me, and when I would look visibly annoyed, she would fake an apology, or just say, "Oh, you know I'm just messing with you," and leave it at that. But I was the only person she did this with, so yeah, it kind of pissed me off. I did my best to ignore her. I learned how much my safety and my feelings, I guess you could say, did not matter to her, though. One day, while I was zoning the shelves in front, a woman came in, probably in her 40s, maybe early 50s. Anyway, she looked close to my mother's age, so I assumed that's how old she was. When she walked in, she looked up at the aisle signs and immediately looked confused. I saw that she was holding what looked like a laptop battery and a piece of paper, so I approached her to see if I could help. She immediately had a warm smile, thanked me, and explained how her laptop battery fried, so she needed a new one, but she also wanted to get a new charging cable since she was using one that didn't go to the laptop, and her son thought that she may have killed it that way. Then, on the piece of paper, she had written down the name and details of a specific hard drive that she wanted, saying her son was going to replace hers because she had a very small one. I confirmed that I could help her find everything she needed, and led the way to the goods, feeling confident about this. Again, this was one of the things that I loved to do, so I was smiling and laughing with her as we made our way to the first aisle that we needed. The first thing that we looked for was the battery. We go to the aisle and show her the ones that were compatible for her system. There was a name brand that matched her laptop, and then other third-party brands. She asked me the difference and which one would be better. Thankfully, we didn't work on commission, so I could give my honest opinion and not necessarily persuade them to go with the more expensive one. While explaining her options, I noticed that she wasn't looking at the batteries, or like she was thinking, but just making eye contact and smiling the whole time. It was a bit awkward at first, so I would look over at the shelf and back at her to keep myself from getting distracted. When I finished, I paused for a second for her to decide or ask something else, but instead she just giggled and said, "Oh, you are too cute." Again, she had to be close to my mother's age, so it was a weird comment, and I didn't know how to respond. Was she hitting on me, or just making a weird comment like B did? I gave an awkward chuckle, said thanks, and tried to move on. She grabbed the battery that I had suggested and had me lead the way to the next item, which was the charging cable. We went to the aisle with the ones that we had, and after looking at a few rows, I couldn't find the specific one that she needed. There were a few bins on the top shelf that had random ones and extras in there, so I thought I would look around in them to see if we might find the one that we need. I had to get a ladder to reach the top, so I went and grabbed it and started climbing to the top to get to it. After grabbing a tub, I looked down to look at the steps when I noticed this woman is again smiling and looking me up and down. I got back down to the floor, trying to ignore her looks, and continued shuffling through the tub. That's when she made a comment about having big feet and asked what shoe size I wore. I awkwardly told her, and she made the comment, "Oh, you know what they say about guys with big feet, right?" And started giggling like a teenage girl. It was a stupid comment that I would expect from someone my age, not someone hers. I again just gave a half laugh and tried to regain my composure and apologize because we didn't have the specific cable. I offered to have it ordered for her, or suggested a few other places she could try as well. I put the tub on the bottom shelf, not wanting to climb back up there, and suggested that we go to find her hard drive next. We got to the hard drives that she was looking for, and the one that was specifically written down was not cheap. This was back in about 2009, and she was looking for a 500 gigabyte drive. When she saw the price, she was pretty surprised, saying that her son failed to mention the price. So, I did what I usually did and offered some alternatives, like cheaper brands or maybe a smaller size. However, she was adamant that she got that one, specifically since that's the one he suggested, and she hesitantly grabbed it. She asked if there were any sales, discounts, or coupons that could be applied to it. I told her there wasn't, but then remembered our store rewards club. When you signed up, you got a 10% off coupon for your first purchase as a member. I told her if she hadn't done that yet, she could sign up at checkout and then use that as a coupon. She seemed pretty happy about that and hugged me, saying that I was smart and something like, "Ooh, I could just kiss you." Again, I laughed and asked her if that was all she needed, and if so, said I could check her out up front. Cue the next cheesy comment from her, of course. And she said, "I've been checking you out this whole time, sweetie," and winked at me. I'm no good at flirting, and again, she was my mother's age, so it just felt incredibly awkward to me. So I led her to the front, smiling, when I saw B up there doing something at one of the registers. As I went around to the other side of the register to start the rewards page for her, she shouted out for B using her actual name, which made her do the same. She came over and they hugged, squealing like little girls. She asked B how she'd been, and they chatted for a few moments when B noticed me standing there waiting, so they directed their attention to me. B said something like me being cute and patiently waiting, and the lady turned to look at me saying, "Is this the guy you were telling me about?" She nodded, smiling. I'm sure I looked incredibly confused, because I was. They obviously knew each other, but she also talked to her about me, and what about, and also why? The lady then said, "Well, he definitely is a cutie, but he's ignored all my advances," while making a pouty face. Then B said something to me along the lines of, "Don't be a tease, Jake, she's just lonely and trying to find love." And her response was, "Or just trying to get lucky," and they both started laughing. They thought this was totally appropriate, and it just made me feel more and more uncomfortable. I tried excusing myself so that I could leave this conversation, to which the lady grabbed my arm begging me to stay, and B told me that I needed to ring her up. I told her that I wasn't feeling well and that I would get someone else to come up if she didn't want to do it. She then mocked me about me being nervous or scared, and that I shouldn't be because I was a guy and that I should learn to take a compliment. I didn't want to say or do something that I would regret, so I just started walking away when the lady then groped me. I jumped back, and then I took off to the back, leaving them both laughing. I didn't know what to do. I was pacing back and forth, worried that B would be back there and probably give me an earful, and then I was worried what would happen if I reported it. Would it really even matter? It was a customer that really was the problem, but B's comments did not help. I stayed back there for a while until one of my friends that worked there came back saying that B was looking for me. I asked him about the lady, and he told me that he hadn't seen her. I told him what happened, and he agreed that it was messed up, and that I should still report it, so I decided to just go home for the day and then report it the next day. I managed to leave a note on the manager door saying that I was leaving for the day, dodge B on my way out, and get in my car. However, that was not the end. The lady was still in the parking lot and had noticed me and was doing a brisk walk towards my car, smiling. I may have burned out of the parking lot. To not drag it out too much, I'll just say that that place lost a lot of my respect. I reported the situation to the assistant manager, and he blew it off, basically saying that maybe I just misunderstood the situation and that he was sure B didn't mean anything by it. I even mentioned how the customer had groped me, and he partially agreed with B that I was a guy and that it's not like my life was in danger. I quit then and there. I grabbed my stuff and told them to shove it and left. My friend was out front on his break, and I told him everything that happened. Thankfully, he agreed with me that it was messed up. I told him to look out for himself and left. He's the only person that I still keep in contact with, but I never returned to that place, not even to shop. Sorry, but that was just a really creepy experience. How can you say someone reminds you of their kid, and then in the same conversation flirt with them and touch them? It's just gross. I used to work in an edgy and popular clothing store when I was younger. I shopped there all the time as a teen when I had the money, so I thought it would be really fun to work there and get discounts, right? While the discount was cool, I learned a lot about people, and I think that proved to be more beneficial in the long run. I had my share of bad and even creepy customers. One of the worst times I remember was around Halloween. The one that I started at was in an outdoor strip mall. It went in a square, basically. You could walk around the outside area to the different stores or restaurants, and the one I was in was pretty much in the corner, between a shoe store and an ice cream shop. And we sold our fair share of spooky apparel and accessories, as well as a few costumes, so it wasn't abnormal to see people coming in wearing one, or all decked out in cosplay. We just really had a few basic rules, which were no masks could be worn inside the building, and obviously no weapons. It was a few days before Halloween, on a Saturday night, and there was a group of people that came in that were all in costume, or their attempt at costumes. Some of them were just wearing a shirt with fake blood on it, or a dress with a witch hat, that kind of thing. And they were being kind of loud, laughing and screaming, and knocking over some of the display items. I noticed in all this commotion that someone was wearing a Michael Myers mask and jumpsuit, and they were just standing over there with them. I hadn't noticed when they walked in if he'd had it on at the time, so I asked him to remove it. Instead of doing so, he just looked over at me and then looked away. So I paged my manager Carlos to let him know, knowing that he wouldn't put up with it. He then walked over to them and told him he needed to take the mask off, or he would have to leave, as it was store policy. Again, the guy just stared at him and cocked his head to the side like he was confused. The other people nearby were all whispering and giggling, so he told them that if their friend didn't take off the mask, he was going to make them all leave. One of the girls responded saying that he wasn't with them, and they just thought it was funny that this guy was taking it so seriously. The store isn't that big, so I could see the back of the store from the front, and I could hear them from the most part if I'm standing in the front of the counter, which I was, of course, because I'm still nosy. With all this going on, he then tells Myers that he needs to leave, and ushers him to the front of the store with little hesitation or fight, thankfully. The rest of them seemed to carry on as normal. They purchased a few cheap things and left, making me think that the other guy really wasn't with them. After about an hour or so, we got a call to the store that I answered. It was a guy asking really weird questions. He asked what time we closed, how many people were working there tonight, and if one of them was a manager. At first, they almost seemed like normal questions. We've had people ask how many were working in person in case they had a larger purchase and needed help carrying it out. And, of course, you're always going to have people asking about a manager. So, I answered them accordingly. That night, however, it was 2 of us and the manager, but one person finished their shift about 3 hours before closing, so it was just going to be me and Carlos that closed up. Then, they said something like, "Oh, I see. Thank you," and hung up. Weird, but oh well. About 10 minutes later or so, we got another call. I could tell it was the same guy by the sound of his voice and his inflections. This time, his questions were a bit more suspicious. He asked if we locked the doors at all for any reason while we were open. I told him no, only when we were closed, of course. And then, he asked who normally locked up the store and had the key. It was weird, but I really didn't know how else to avoid the question, so I just said that was all on the manager's list of responsibilities. But then he asked, "What do you do if there's an emergency?" Curious and probably falling for something, I asked what he meant. Then he asked, "What if there was a fire? What are you supposed to do? Or perhaps a robbery or hostage situation?" At that point, I just said that we would act accordingly and then hung up on him. Even though it was kind of weird and creepy to ask, I was more so worried about hanging up on a customer, so I hollered for Carlos to come to the front, since there weren't any customers at the time. He came up, and I explained to him what had happened, and he agreed that those questions were pretty suspicious, and that he thought I did the right thing by hanging up on him. He said to page him if the guy calls back, and then headed back to what he was doing. A little on edge, I tried to forget about it and continued playing the game that I was playing on my phone. I already did my rounds of the shelves, and there was no point in sweeping until we closed, so I really had nothing else to do. So, about 20 minutes in, we get another call. I answer it, prepared to go get Carlos, but this time the voice seemed muffled, like something may have been covering their face or their phone. This time, the person asked where the manager was, but the way that they said it was creepy. You know how there are some voices that are just unsettling, and that one, or at least how they asked the question, made me really uncomfortable. I started to get up to walk to the back, but the phone still wasn't a cordless one, so I was going to have to put it down to get Carlos. I wasn't going to tell the caller that, though, so I just said, "They're right here. Would you like to talk to them?" Hoping to get out of the conversation as well, I was expecting a yes or a no, but instead, their response was, "It certainly doesn't look like they're with you, Bridget." So, my thoughts. How the hell did they know my name? And how the hell would they know that my manager wasn't up front? Now, they definitely could have been fibbing on one, trying to call me out, but since they used my name, I was kind of creeped out again. I tried just asking again if they wanted to talk to the manager, but they didn't respond. Thinking they hung up, I started pulling the phone down from my ear and yelled for Carlos. I turned to put the phone on the receiver, which would put me facing the front doors and the wall of glass, when I saw someone standing in front of it. It made me jump because I wasn't expecting it, of course, but it only got worse. That's when I realized that it was someone in a Michael Myers mask and jumpsuit holding a phone to their ear. I noped out of there real quick and ran to the back. I didn't know if I would make it to the front doors to lock it in time, so that was my first reaction. Carlos was coming up front, so being the young, small girl that I was, and freaking out, he tried to calm me down to find out what was going on. After explaining what happened, he told me to go ahead and use the phone in the back to call 911, and said he was going to check out the front. I called them, gave them the info, and after waiting a few minutes, I left the room to make sure that Carlos was okay. He was standing right by the doors looking around, but the guy was nowhere to be found. The cops came, and after getting the information, they stayed around for a bit to see if they would call back or even come back to the store, but they never did. The store phone didn't even have a caller ID, so I don't know if they were able to do anything with the phones. We weren't allowed to close early, but Carlos must have been able to tell that I was pretty shaken up, so he let me go home early. A police officer escorted me to my car, and I went straight home, locking all of my doors and windows. I worked that next evening with Carlos, even though I didn't want to be there at all, but at least this time someone was working with me the whole night. However, it wasn't much of a relief, as when I got there, I was informed that someone was trying to break into the store that last night. There were visible scratches all over the door and lock, as well as even the glass, like someone was scraping it with something really sharp. I don't know if this person was just doing it to pull a prank, or if they were trying to seriously harm us or do damage, but either way, it was not funny. At all. Not to mention, I still have no idea how they knew my name. If it was the same guy as earlier, I wasn't even close enough for them to see my name tag. Some people take their stupid Halloween pranks too far. I really didn't feel safe there after that, and it was no one's fault but that guy, so thankfully I was able to transfer to a different store, and I never had any similar experiences at that one. So, Mr. Myers, I hope that we never meet again, and also, your jokes are not funny. I worked at an old video rental store in my early 20s. No, it wasn't the blue and yellow one, though, but one that could be found in smaller, rural cities. At one point, I had an accident outside of work, causing me to break my tibia. I, of course, was put in a cast and had to be on bed rest for a few weeks. As expected, though, my manager called me during this time, knowing I'm supposed to be resting, to ask if I could come in for about 6 hours. There's usually at least 3 people working, and one person had called in on this day, and the other then decided that they wanted to quit when they went to lunch. They left and just never came back. The manager had to do the schedule and something else, so he didn't have the ability to man the register at the same time. He said he would give me an extra break and that I could sit down, of course, while I was there. I agreed, since I really couldn't afford missing a lot of work anyways. Thankfully, my roommate helped me and was kind enough to drive me there since I knew my mom would refuse to let me go. Once I got there, my manager helped me get set up in a chair and a prop for my leg to rest on the bottom shelf behind the counter. It was definitely wonky, but it worked, and I really appreciated his efforts when he could have just told me to suck it up. Anyways, the evening was fine for the first few hours. And people actually noticed my leg since the swinging door on the side was by the entrance, so they could see my leg and the crutches leaning against the counter. Surprisingly, this made people more considerate in getting stuff themselves, or leaning in to hand me their payment method. It was about 8 p.m. when my manager came out saying they had to go get the key, because the person that quit was a shift manager and opened that day, so they had the key. It was a Tuesday, I think, or another weird weekday, so I knew that it was going to be a slower night, and I didn't have any problems being there alone. We weren't supposed to lock the door unless there was an emergency, but they told me I could in case I needed to, so the store wasn't unoccupied. They left saying that it shouldn't take more than 20 minutes or so, and left. As I usually do, I brought a book with me to read and had music playing on the old radio that was up front. Shortly after, a guy came in and immediately looked around the store after greeting me. He made a quick comment about my leg, as people did, and after answering him, he walked off to look at the movies. He walked over to the horror section. He looked like an average guy. Short hair, jeans, a shirt, average build and height. Basically, he didn't stand out and didn't put off any weird vibes either. There was also a younger couple in there as well, so I just looked up at my book at times to watch them. After the couple left, the guy approached the counter, smiling, and asked if I was the only one here. We weren't supposed to be left alone, so I told him no, and that my manager was in the back working on the books. He raised his eyebrow like he was confused, but then just shrugged and walked away. I was curious, but then started wondering if he was going to ask for a manager. That typically happened when they wanted to complain, of course, or get a fee waived, so I zoned out trying to think of an excuse as to why my manager couldn't come out, or why I couldn't go get them when he made his way back up to the counter. It made me jump because he had tossed a few different movies onto the counter and said, "I got a question for you." I looked up, smiling, and before I could respond, he leaned in asking in a deeper, slower voice, "Which one of these movies would you watch on a first date?" I kinda chuckled, as this was the first time I had gotten this question, and looked down at his choices. I immediately noticed 3 of the 4 were not ones that I recognized. One was a movie that I knew and actually liked, whereas the others looked a bit more risque. We didn't have those kind of adult videos, but we did have rated R ones. When I saw him in the horror section, I figured that's what he had picked out, which made me laugh. When I looked up at him, he had a flat look on his face, like he was waiting for an actual answer. So I chose the one that I knew, smiling, saying that that was a good movie. I looked up to see that his face had now changed to one of disappointment. I just kind of waited a few moments to see if he would say something, but when he didn't, I tried to break the silence by saying, "Sorry, I've just never seen the other ones." Then he seemed to come back to the conversation with a smug grin. He said, "Nah, I get it. The other one would probably put you in the mood, right?" And let out this little laugh. It was a bit awkward, as I'd never been asked something so personal by a complete stranger, so I looked towards the computer screen to try to ignore the question. He didn't get the hint, though, and continued to stand there. In fact, he leaned in even more with his chest nearly on the counter and said, "You are the only one here, aren't you?" I looked up at him, pushing myself back as he was close to my face. After seeing his grin, I looked back down at the computer and asked him if he was going to get one of those videos, hoping to get him out of the store. This seemed like it was lasting forever. I continued looking down at the monitor, praying that he would just go away or something would happen, because I didn't have anything to defend myself with other than my crutch. I forgot to have my manager bring the cordless phone up front, so I didn't even have a phone on me. My phone had broken in the accident, and I couldn't afford a new one at the time. Thank God, someone finally walked into the store, and it was one of our regulars, a guy named Tom. I looked over at him, and I'm sure that I must have had a look of relief on my face. He said hi, calling me by my name, and I did the same. The creep wasn't in my face at this point, but was still leaning on the counter. Tom then walked over to the new releases, which were the aisle right in front of the counter, by me. They were typically the pricier rentals, so we kept them closer to the front. The creep noticed this and let out a slight chuckle as he grabbed the 4 videos and slowly walked away, watching me the entire time. Every so often, Tom looked over at me and then to that guy. He made a motion towards me as if saying, "What's his deal?" And I just shrugged wide-eyed. The guy eventually walked out without even renting anything. Shortly after, another person walked in and Tom came up to the counter to ask what that guy was doing. Without going into detail, I told him that he was being really creepy. That's when he told me why he came over here. He was usually here on Fridays, and he always checked out one of the old Western movies and a kids movie. He had like a 6-year-old girl. So it was odd seeing him in here on a Tuesday and looking at the new releases. I understood what he was doing at that point. He said he was at the McDonald's across the street and that same creep was over there, being very weird to one of the workers there, and making really suggestive comments. Tom was an ex-cop, so he watched the guy closely as he left and saw that he walked across the street and was worried that he would try to start something over here too. And that's when he decided to come over here to check. I was never so thankful that he came in here because I didn't know what else this guy may have tried. And like I said, I'm a smaller girl, and I was in a cast. I wouldn't be able to literally stand my ground very well, let alone defend myself. Tom stayed until my manager got back, and after explaining everything to him, he went and looked at the area where he went, and noticed he had sliced open one of the cases and stole the DVD. Funnily enough, it was the movie that I had suggested. Lucky for us, this was enough to ban him from our store, and my manager promised he would make sure that no one was ever working alone again, even though we weren't supposed to in the first place. And to the creepy guy, I just hope that you and I never meet again. So this was a collection of retail stories, creepy retail stories, retail work, retail working retail. I'm tag fluffing right now. You can ignore this. I'm kidding. Retail work can be creepy. I've worked retail. I worked at a Blockbuster, as a matter of fact, to the video rental person that submitted that story. I used to work at a Blockbuster, and while we didn't have any creepy people, we did have some weird ones. I used to also work at a Quiznos, Subs, the sandwich place, and we had a guy that came in there that ordered the same thing every single day. He was nice, though. It was less creepy and more just like, I couldn't see myself going into a sandwich shop and ordering the same thing 5 days a week. I'd grow tired of it pretty quick, so. Yeah. Yeah, retail stories are crazy. If you guys have any retail stories you want to send my way, please do send them my way. Redundancy. send them my way, and yeah, I'd love to feature them if you want to do so. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do hit that thumbs up button, and if you didn't, well, then don't. If you would also subscribe to the channel if you're new and liked what you heard, and if you didn't like what you heard, well, then you're not going to hit subscribe, are you? I don't know what I'm saying here. You can also leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts on the video, on the stories, on the content, on me, on my new banner art. I changed things slightly, very slightly. On the weather. Weather sucked. It's kind of hot out. Kind of. Anyways, I hope you all have a beautiful day. And hope you're having a great weekend. And I hope that I do see you on the next video. But of course, until then, my friends, sleep well.